grabbed Bruce Lee's collar in front of everyone, thinking it would make him look powerful. What he didn't realize was that some people don't react. They calculate. Bruce Lee was sitting quietly in a dimly lit training hall while the atmosphere around him felt unusually heavy. A stranger walked in with an arrogant expression and eyes fixed on Bruce as if he had already decided the outcome. Without greeting or respect, he stepped forward and grabbed Bruce Lee by the collar, pulling him slightly closer as silence spread across the room. Everyone expected an instant reaction, a sudden burst of force, but Bruce remained calm, his eyes steady and unreadable like a still lake before a storm. The stranger tightened his grip, trying to intimidate him, unaware that every second of silence was being measured by a mind trained beyond fear. Bruce slowly looked down at the hand gripping his collar and then back up at the man as if studying a mistake already made. In that moment, the entire room held its breath because no one knew whether the next second would bring violence or something far more terrifying. The stranger leaned in and whispered something meant to provoke fear, but Bruce did not respond immediately. Instead, he shifted his stance ever so slightly, grounding himself as if preparing for a movement that no one could predict. The tension grew thicker as onlookers realized that the situation was no longer about strength, but about control and awareness. A single breath from Bruce seemed to echo louder than the grip on his collar as time slowed down. The stranger finally began to realize that something about this calm silence was deeply unsettling, and just when it felt like everything would explode into action, Bruce shifted his eyes with an intensity that changed the entire atmosphere. The people watching felt a strange pressure in the air, as if the room itself was reacting to the silent confrontation. Bruce gently placed his fingers over the wrist of the hand holding his collar, not forcefully but with precise control. It was not an attack, but a subtle demonstration of awareness that made the stranger hesitate. For the first time, confidence began to fade from the stranger's face as he felt the situation slipping beyond his control. Bruce did not raise his voice or show anger. Instead, his presence alone seemed to reshape the entire moment. The silence deepened again as both men stood locked in a confrontation that no one in the room dared to interrupt. What happened next was something no one there would ever forget. As the balance of power quietly shifted, Bruce took a slow step forward, not to attack, but to position himself in a way that removed any advantage the stranger thought he had. The air felt heavier as realization spread that this moment was no longer under control of the man who had made the first move. Bruce remained still, watching carefully as the situation continued to shift into something unpredictable. The silence held everyone frozen, waiting for what? The stranger had not come quietly or respectfully. He entered the space as if it already belonged to him, scanning the room with a sense of superiority that made a few people shift uncomfortably in their seats. And the moment his eyes locked on Bruce Lee, something in his expression changed from curiosity to provocation, as if he had found the exact target he was looking for. He began walking forward slowly but deliberately, each step carrying the weight of ego rather than confidence. And those nearby could sense that this was not a normal interaction but a performance meant for attention. The stranger stopped just a few feet away from Bruce and looked him up and down with a faint smirk, almost mocking the quiet discipline that surrounded him. Bruce remained seated, calm and composed, showing no reaction that could feed the stranger's growing need for dominance. And this silence only fueled the arrogance further as the stranger leaned slightly forward and began speaking loudly enough for others to hear, making comments about strength, reputation, and proving oneself in front of others. His tone was sharp, designed to provoke a response, but Bruce's face stayed unchanged, as if the words were passing through empty space without finding a place to land. The room itself began to feel tighter as more eyes turned toward them, sensing that something was building but unsure of what direction it would take. The stranger then raised his voice again, this time more direct, challenging Bruce not just with words but with posture, stepping even closer into his personal space as if shrinking the distance would increase his control over the situation. And when Bruce still did not react immediately, the stranger misread the silence as weakness rather than discipline, mistaking calm for hesitation. His confidence swelled in that misunderstanding, and he reached out suddenly, grabbing Bruce Lee's collar in front of everyone as a statement meant to humiliate rather than engage. The gesture was meant to break the calm and force an immediate reaction, but instead it created a deeper silence that swallowed the entire room. Because Bruce did not respond in the way the stranger expected. There was no panic, no sudden movement, only stillness that felt heavier than aggression. And in that moment, the stranger stood holding on to something he believed he controlled, unaware that he had already stepped into a situation far beyond his understanding. The audience watched closely, realizing too late that this was no longer about physical confrontation, but about perception, patience, and the dangerous mistake of underestimating someone who does not compete for attention but controls it without effort. And the stranger's arrogance, once loud and visible, now stood exposed in the middle of a silence that began to feel like judgment rather than pause. The moment the stranger's hand tightened on Bruce Lee's collar, the entire energy of the room began to change, not suddenly like an explosion, but slowly like a tide shifting direction where no one is sure when it started, only that it is no longer the same. Bruce remained still, not out of fear or surprise, but because he was already observing everything. The pressure of the grip, the distance between them, the stance of the stranger, and even the reactions of the people watching. And in that stillness, something subtle but powerful began to emerge, a kind of control that does not announce itself. It simply replaces everything else. The stranger tried to maintain dominance by keeping his hand firm, but he did not notice that his own posture was beginning to betray tension. His shoulders slightly rigid, his breathing uneven, his confidence no longer flowing freely as it had moments before. Bruce's eyes, calm and focused, did not rush or react emotionally. Instead, they studied the situation like a precise calculation, and without any visible effort, he shifted his weight just slightly, a small adjustment that most people would never notice. But in that small movement, the balance of the confrontation began to tilt. Not through force, but through awareness. The kind that makes aggression feel misplaced in the presence of complete control. The stranger, still holding on, began to feel something unfamiliar creeping in, a quiet uncertainty that had nothing to do with strength and everything to do with understanding. Because Bruce's silence was no longer passive, it had become active presence, filling the space in a way that made the stranger feel like he was the one being observed, analyzed and measured, and that realization started to erode his confidence from the inside. The crowd too could sense the shift. As whispers died down and even small movements stopped, everyone unconsciously reacting to the change in dominance that could not be seen but was deeply felt. Bruce slowly brought his hand closer, not striking, not pulling away, but aligning himself with complete control of distance and timing. And in that moment it became clear that the situation was no longer about who grabbed whom, but about who understood what was happening. The stranger's earlier arrogance now felt distant, replaced by hesitation that he could not hide, while Bruce's calmness deepened into something far more commanding than aggression, because true dominance in that moment was not about resistance, but about the ability to remain unshaken while everything else begins to shift around you. And as the silence stretched further, it was clear that the control of the moment had already changed hands without a single loud action taking place.